Hey everybody, and welcome to another Konoha Reviews. Today we take a look at the highly anticipated Death Stranding. I realize that this review is a little bit late and most other review sites or channels already have theirs uploaded. But the truth of the matter is that this game was massive and I wanted to review it once I had completed it. It was a very unique game, and during its 35-hour journey, my emotions and thoughts about the game tumbled all across the room as I loved certain aspects of it and hated others. Review-wise, this game has divided many critics, with many giving it the ridiculous score of a 10 or 100, and then there are others who have it way lower, with very few reviews sites having a score in between. What happens here, in my opinion, is that Hideo Kojima gets treated by the game industry like Quentin Tarantino is treated by the film industry, that they get away with certain things that other directors or creators would not get away with. I'm absolutely certain that if Kojima's name was not attached to this project, that the overall score for this would be so much lower. But there is a lot to love in this game as well, so let's get out our tweezers and dissect this unique game. Death Stranding tells the story of Sam Porter, a delivery man who makes deliveries in the post-apocalyptic America. I say America, but in the environment is very clearly inspired upon Iceland rather than America itself. But anyway, through some mysterious occurrences, the people that are left in America live in underground cities, as being touched by rain or snow above ground will rapidly age you. A middle-aged woman can be turned to a grandma in a matter of seconds, were she to stand out in the open with her skin bare. Since Sam is a delivery man and is sometimes forced to travel through rain, he wears suits to protect his skin from contact. Besides the rain being deadly, there are also mysterious beings known as BTs, ghostly figures that are invisible to the naked eye. Sam, who has the unique ability to come back from the dead, can sense these things, but is not able to see them like the rest of us. But for that, the humans of this time period use something known as a BB, a bridge baby, which is a baby in a jar that when woken up can see the beings for you. An antenna rises from your suit and points you into the direction of the BTs so you can avoid them. And then there are the so-called mules, that are scavengers who roam the wasteland in search of other porters and delivery men to steal their cargo. They have the same weapons tech as you, and you can often decide to sneak past them or exchange in combat. Then finally there are the terrorists, who wish to nuke the remaining cities and make this world extinct. It all seems a bit convoluted, complicated and hocus pocus, but in reality I found that this storyline is way more simple than Kojima's Metal Gear series in the past. It's way more character driven, first of all, which unfortunately doesn't work in its favor in terms of predictability. Rather than the story continues at the hand of occurrences, you move from character to character to do jobs for them. Even before you met certain characters in person, you already know that at one point you will get to their chapter and then do the same thing you've been doing for hours on end, delivering packages for them too. Metal Gear's storyline was way more intriguing, deep, and yet still philosophical at the same time. And it was not trying so hard, as this storyline does. Now, regardless of the character-based story not being all that engaging, the characters themselves are almost all excellent. The backstories of characters like Deadman, Mama, and Hartman are all stellar. You are glued to the screen during the cutscenes where they explain what they went through. I will say that for the first 5 to 6 hours, I absolutely adored this game. The mysterious world and characters had my mind racing with possibilities of where the story and gameplay would go. The fact that you have to manage the weight you are carrying on your back and balance it out by holding the triggers was something I had never seen before. It felt new, but not new enough to resolve a whole game around that mechanic. The moment it struck me that I was in for something really great was when I was carrying the corpse of the former President of America, which also happened to be your mother, on your back, and the camera zooms out as you walk and this beautiful song from Low Roar starts playing. As I walk through this gorgeous Icelandic landscape, I pan the camera around and really feel something I'd never felt before in playing any other games. It gives you a sense of melancholy, of loneliness, but also of purpose and even tranquility. In some sense, I can see where the early gameplay of this game could be seen as therapeutic or like meditation. The game is also great at introducing small new changes with each new delivery you need to make. Ladders get introduced, which you can place pretty much anywhere to reach otherwise inaccessible spots. You can use them to cross rivers and gaps or climb up steep cliffs. The fact that you can literally place them anywhere manages to convey a feeling that everywhere you see, you can get to. This is a phrase that is popular with many open world games, but in truth, they mean that you can go to any place you can see in the distance, but not necessarily ascend every rock or stone. In this game, you can. The ladders and climbing ropes will soon be accompanied by other things you can create, like generators to recharge vehicles or suits, bridges to cross long distances, and at a certain point even roads to safely travel across entire fields without hassle. For many of the deliveries, you also need to head back to your original starting location after you have made the delivery, so there is a lot of backtracking involved, and the truth is that there's simply not a lot happening in the world around you. In fact, aside from the BTs, which are invisible unless you stand still and then they are just these vague looking silhouettes, and the mules, which are cool at first but become a bit boring after you still come across them 30 hours into the game and all they have is a bit better armor and weapons, there's simply not much happening in the world. And like I said, the area that you are in the beginning, which really looks like the green landscapes from Iceland, it is beautiful enough to justify this. By that time, you've also only played the game for 5 hours, so you find the experience still fresh and new. But after 10 hours in, I was beginning to worry, because I was still picking up packages here and delivering them there. Very little things were introduced to make the gameplay any more fun or engaging. Sometimes you would get a new grenade or maybe a floating crate to put cargo in, but you were still walking for hours and hours from one point to the other in a barren wasteland that just happens to look very beautiful. After the first 5 hours or so, the story also really takes a dip for the next couple of hours. Cutscenes are completely erased and instead are told through these boring hologram messages. The missions are not engaging at all and feel even forced or like simple side quests in other games. You are tasked with convincing other inhabitants to join the chiral network in your society, and in order to convince them, they each have different assignments for you which, you guessed it, are more deliveries. It was at this point that it started to dawn on me that this game would be actually quite boring and very repetitive in its gameplay, and I was not wrong. For about 90% of all you do in the game, you run from point A to B, and that is it. Were this any other game developer, I'm sure more review sites would have called out the blatant repetitive nature of this game. And then there are some reviewers who feel a bit more elite for some reason and say that there's simply a higher meaning or philosophical metaphor for the nihilistic gameplay. Some were even arrogant enough to say that some reviewers would not possess the vocabulary knowledge to express that in their review. But let's not pretend that indie developers have not tackled similar philosophical topics in their games and they still get called out for lacking gameplay or story. The whole point with this world that you are running through is that it is simply not interesting. It is beautiful, don't get me wrong, but nothing is happening in it. The BTs are extremely boring enemies, since they are invisible most of the time anyway, and when they do catch you, they are extremely easy to dodge. At a certain point, I actually did not sneak anymore when I encountered them, but I simply sprinted through and avoided almost every single one of them. I never died to a BT once, and I played on normal. If one were to put the world of Red Dead Redemption next to this one, a great difference can immediately be noticed, and that is how alive the world feels in Red Dead. Now, I understand the whole point of Death Stranding is that everything is dead, but that leaves interesting random events off the table. Even if you take out the people in Red Dead Redemption, it still feels so alive with flocks of birds flying over, a group of deer crossing the road, or a crocodile quickly heading into the swampy waters. If you play this game online, there are many things scattered across the landscape, like signs left by other players, or even things like ladders, ropes, and bridges that you yourself can use. Whenever you create a structure or object of your own and place it in the world, a random number of other players will have that object spawn in their world too. This makes it feel like you are part of something bigger without actually encountering anyone, and that is indeed a very unique and cool feature. It still does not make the world feel alive though, but at least it makes it feel bigger than yourself. You will get a message whenever someone has used one of your objects, and it feels nice to see that happen. One way I think that people might enjoy this game more, and this is not necessarily a good thing, is if they were to play Death Stranding in sessions of 1 to 2 hours, since it won't feel that repetitive by then. I played sessions of 3 to 4 hours sometimes, and just doing the same thing over and over and over again really made me dislike major parts of the game. I always started positive, and it is really cool to start preparing for a long journey. Do you have new boots for it if your old ones give out? Do you have enough to drink? Do you have enough ladders and ropes to cross rough terrain? What about blood bags in case you get hurt? It's all very cool indeed, but even that gets repetitive after you are doing it for the 7th time in the one session you play. The marketing for this game is also baffling, with most of the crazy things we saw in the trailers involving Mads Mikkelsen and weird undead soldiers not happening until well 15 hours into the game. In these sections, the game finally changes a little bit and becomes a more action-based game. But unfortunately, there's another thing gravely wrong with this, and it is something that once again, I'm surprised that none of the sites and reviewers who gave this a 100 score call it out. During these sections, there are 3 of them, you will engage in combat with Mads Mikkelsen's character. He's a bit like a boss. The way this happens is you search for him on the battlefield and then shoot him a couple of times. He's often surrounded by the undead soldiers, which you will have to kill as well. All fun and games, but once you've shot Mikkelsen's character enough times, he says something like, "Fall back, we need reinforcements," and move out. He will then teleport to a new location with his undead soldiers, and you will have to find him again and shoot him again. You will have to do this around 4 or so times in each section before they are complete. Now, the first time this happens, which is set in the trenches of World War I, it already occurred to me that every time you shoot him enough times and he teleports, he literally says the exact same line of "fall back, we need reinforcements, move out," etc., which felt a bit cheap and lazy. But to my biggest surprise, he says the exact same line over and over and over again in the other sections where you meet him as well. The other times you meet him are set in World War II and the Vietnam War, and the combat plays out exactly the same. You search for him and shoot him and his undead buddies. It is ridiculously simple, repetitive, and frankly a bit boring. And the repetition in the line delivery makes it seem like they only had 1 day of recording with the actual actor. These are blatant things that would otherwise be criticized in any other games by most reviewers. The repetition in lines is not a game breaker, it's just a small notion, but it is something worth noting in a review. The fact that none of these reviewers that gave a 100 score mentioned that the combat encounters with Mikkelsen's character are simply copy-paste is baffling to me. Even in God of War, a game that is way better than this one, I felt that, and many more reviewers too for that matter, that you would face way too many of the same troll bosses that were essentially the same fight over and over again. So the overall gameplay of Death Stranding is boring, and then you finally get some diversion, and it is super simple, lackluster, and even repetitive as well. In the end, the only reason why I kept playing was to see where the story would go, and that is still a stellar part of this game. The characters, setting, and story are all magnificent, and maybe worth checking out a video on YouTube or so. But it does not justify running through nothing and nothing for hours on end. Ironically, one of the aspects I did really like was building roads, since the reward was so great and you could skip so much walking. I generally am interested in those who find this game so great, why it is so great in terms of gameplay and gameplay alone. Why do you like running through nothing for such a long time? Does it give you time to clear your head? Does it feel engaging? I am generally interested, because like I said, the first 5 hours were exactly that to me. And where this game, 5 to 6 hours, I would have been a lot more positive. But in the end, the gameplay is simply too boring to withstand 35 hours. In the end, I'm giving Death Stranding a 7.3. The production quality behind this game is amazing, but gameplay it falls short on many levels, and is simply very shallow. I am surprised that some people say that Kojima can do no wrong, because I remember the storm that happened where people were not happy with playing as Raiden in Metal Gear Solid 2 instead of Snake. Kojima is a great storyteller and designer. I love Metal Gear Solid and even adore the 4th title too. But that does not mean that everything he makes is pure gold, and that is just the case here. Death Stranding was a game that I enjoyed for its story, but not the gameplay. It's probably not a game I will ever go back to.